What's cool about this one is that you actually worked for Workshop. I didn't. I didn't work for Workshop until the year after this came out. So it was in the store.
Yeah.
When I was there, when I first started working as a part-timer in Scarborough, but it wasn't actually like the big launch for it. So I interacted with this as a customer first in '98, actually.
Right.
Because I started using all my fantasy miniatures out of White Dwarf, because this was originally
it was that string of White Dwarf articles, right?
Yeah, and then which you can find on Broheim even, like they're all kind of like archived out there. So like there's this was like a moment in time before kind of the studio transitioned into the new studio in like 3rd edition 40K.
It's actually really interesting because it's funny. I was thinking about how this is going to fit within the context of the dialogue, and it's not. So it feels like one of those, maybe when we get to the whole product versus art thing, I'll talk about it, because being in the company at the time and selling it and selling the things that came before it and selling the things that came after it, it's not like Mordheim is necessarily the instant moment where things change.
Yeah.
But that era represents a huge shift and that I think we're still feeling the ripples of today.
Yeah.
Which I always have a hard time explaining to people, because I think, you know, that thing where people listen to half or 10% of what you say and then instantly react negatively to it. This is one of those things for me, because like I'll start explaining where I think it's a cultural shift and everybody's like, old man yells at clouds. You just don't like this thing. And it's like, no, that's not it. It just represents something else.
This feels like the last punk album. You know what I mean? Yep. Like it kind of feels like the last punk album. So hey everybody, we are covering Mordheim today on Grimdark Media. This is our patron pick for this month, and this was their pick for Game Media. They chose Mordheim, the 1999 pre-millennium tension.
Well, it's got to be it's got to be pre-millennium.
Well, but it's about a millennium.
This is the Y2K game.
This is the Y2K game. This is the pre-millennium paranoia 25 years ago, and this is the 25th anniversary of Mordheim this year. I'm also doing a project called Damn 25. This is all very appropriate, and what we're going to do is break down the history of this book right here, which is Mordheim.
And can I just start off by saying, as minimalist as it is, I still think that's one of the best book covers GW has ever done.
100%. Yeah, it even has a name. It's called, they published the name of the art piece in here. It's called the Vision of Mordheim by Jeff Taylor. Yeah, it's like a Jeff Taylor piece.
It's so minimalist, but it's so effective. It's so good. Like I love that.
It's that split crow with like the crow skull. It's just this like dead bird. It's funny because there's all like, the reason I call this their last punk album is that this is a time where they don't bother codifying anything. So to give you guys the background, because before we launch into Bon Voyage, the whole point of I think us talking about this game is that we want to also explore, why is this game still popular today? Why is this game 25 years old, unsupported, hasn't been published probably since 2006, at least almost 20 years?
And again, I'll get more into what I think when we get into the product versus art thing. But for me, it's because for a certain type of player, this is the last kick at the can for something that represents the end of an era with Games Workshop.
Yeah.
It's not the only game like this. Like Necromunda has a lot of this in it. To a lesser extent, Gorka Morka does. But this represents the end of an era to me.
It's a design philosophy that's steeped in storytelling. It's a storytelling first, rules second, I think, design philosophy.
You don't think, you're just objectively correct.
You're just, okay, cool. So objectively correct. So, and there's tons to back this up from the author. It's written by, of course, Thomas Piran, and this is probably his, I love 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle, but I think this is the thing he's best known for.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's tons of help from Rick Priestley and Alessio Cavatore. So a very pedigreed like writing team. Now the art in this book is also one of the things that should be noted. The Jeff Taylor cover obviously is cool, but I think there's so much iconic John Blanchard in here. Alex Boyd, who was like a young artist at the time, who I love. He's the one I would actually credit with the grimdarking of 40K, because his art style in 4th edition Warhammer 40,000 is everywhere, and it's incredible.
What's interesting to me about the art in this book is how many different artists contributed to it.
Yeah.
While at the same time, it has a completely coherent,
absolutely,
but not rigidly style guided art.
Yeah.
Like it's very rare.
It is very rare that you have something that's so to theme and yet has so many artists, because there's also Dave Gallagher, Noella Kennedy, Carl Kopinski, Paul Smith, and John Wigley. And then the card items and stuff are all done by Neil Hodgson. That includes all the cool cardstock terrain. So this came packed in what I would say is probably one of the most complete starter sets of all time. It was one of the best fit to purpose, I think, star sets of all time, because you had incredible multi-part human militia, which didn't exist prior to this, and these incredible multi-part night runners that also entered the fantasy range, obviously, after this, and were compatible. But the amount of like Lego Man customization you could do was huge. You also got effectively a full table of the train. We played 3 games of Mordheim just recently for the kickoff of Dam 25 on just the cardstock terrain that came in there. And it is beautiful cardstock terrain because the art is all being done in the same style as this book. So you have art that's like already your table looks like you would want it to look like if you just take some time and put this stuff together properly.
It also feels like there's a certain amount of learning from, again, from Necromunda. Because with the OG Necromunda terrain, it looked fantastic if it was done properly.
Yeah.
But there was a bit of a break between form and function in that in a lot of places it was too solid, and in a lot of places it was too transparent.
Yeah.
And the Mordheim stuff, without doing anything super tricky or fancy, it seemed like it got that balance exactly right.
Yeah, like almost perfectly right. And you were in the stores when this was all being prepped for demo tables too. So you literally had to like probably put together like 15 or 20 of these sets at some point with people.
So we actually, where I was, we actually did it a little different, because instead of building a ton of the breakaway terrain, and again, we'll get into this in terms of why I think it lives in a weird place. I found the art way more inspiring than the actual visual components that came with it. So the first store I was in at the time, we built a 3-tiered table, and it was basically bare MDF, which was the sewers. Like it was carved all the way down to the bare MDF, an upper level, which was the street level, which was all done in cobblestones on foam. And then a level beyond that, which was all of our ruined buildings. So like the mistake we made was in a game where you're like guessing distances and stuff. When you've got a fixed table, everything is always the same distance away.
Yeah. You know exactly where everything is.
But we worked more to the art than to the game components.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, it was well supported in White Dwarf too. So to say that this game is kind of unique in the landscape of Games Workshop's games, I think is very accurate. And also there was a habit at the time of pre-publishing games and getting people ready for game systems in White Dwarf. Mm-hmm. White Dwarf very powerfully kind of like promoted, because we're very like internet exists, but we're pre-internet marketing really at this point. White Dwarf really existed to like raise the awareness of this game coming out. And when it did come out, it landed very well and then kind of instantly disappeared. It was one of these games that came and went. People kind of wanted another Necromunda. And while this game was a Necromunda, it was so kind of like story driven, and you couldn't gamify it that much, although there were some really powerful builds out of the box, that I think that it got eaten up by 3rd edition 40K at the time.
The other big problem was the way the product life cycle worked at the time. And it's funny because Games Workshop got away from that and now has gotten way
back
deeper or worse at it, depending on how you want to look at it, is that by the time a game hit, all that space in White Dwarf was being used to promote the next game that was coming next.
Yeah.
So the problem is, as soon as you could actually physically get your hands on something, your FOMO was being redirected towards the next thing and not the thing that you could actually have.
Yeah. And so there's a period basically until about 2004, the Fnatic era kind of relaunched it a little bit. It got supported by a really cool magazine series called Town Crier that got a little too punk rock at times. We had to have a couple issues that got pulled. I was a member of the team that pulled an issue of Town Crier for having a incredibly objectionable thing on the back of it.
I mean, White Knights are always the good guys.
That's
aren't
right.
They?
White Knights are usually the good guys. It matters where they're from. And you guys can look that one up for yourselves. It was actually Pale-Faced Riders was what it was.
Pale-Faced Riders? I apologize. I thought it was White Riders.
No, it was Pale-Faced Riders.
That makes more sense.
And then we had Empire in Flames, which was the final expansion for the game. Came out in the Fnatic era when Jervis Johnson was publishing Fnatic magazine and was supported by 2 other warbands, which is the Beastmen and the Carnival of Chaos. So the initial book has 6 warbands in it. There's 2 expansion warbands through Town Crier and the Best of Town Crier, which were the dwarves and the orcs and goblins. And that kind of put most of the fantasy range available for you to pillage to play this game. And that kind of probably made it hard to track the success of too, because so much of this game could be played off the fantasy wall. So you didn't necessarily have a direct way of tracking how well was Mordheim selling, because everything that was Warhammer Fantasy Battle could effectively land into Mordheim.
And this is another shift skirmish game wise for GW between that era of games, whether it's again Mordheim or Necromunda, versus the current games. So like if you're playing Warcry or Current Necro or any of that stuff, they all have their own very dedicated fixed ranges. And don't see not a huge portion of the player base does a lot of conversions and stuff.
Right.
And during this era for Fnatic and pre-Fnatic, that was really celebrated, like in White Dwarf, in game groups. So, you know, the goal was always to have something that looked completely different from everybody else, even if you were all starting from the same basic kits. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was definitely hard to figure out, did I buy those Empire figures to do Empire, or did I do them for Mordheim? Did I buy those Empire figures to do Empire soldiers, or did I buy them to do like manky looking undead for Mordheim? Like,
so this is an interesting time. So I think what we need to do now is we need to find a fish, because there's always fish somewhere in this game. We need to strap it either on our heads or somewhere on our shields or bodies, and then set forth, because there's a green glow in the distance that will basically like attract all of the scavengers to this benighted burg of Mordheim as we set bon voyage.
Pack your bags and chew off your fingers. It's time for Bon Voyage.
All right, in Bon Voyage, we spoil everything. Although this is not a game, a narrative game, in that like there's a story for us to spoil. We will give you
the Mordheims did it.
The Mordheims did it. There is some narrative stuff that comes out of Mordheim that I think is worth talking to us about, because the basic setting for Mordheim is that it is the year of our Lord, 1999. Of course, this was like this
by
was
our
super
Lord
relevant.
you mean Sigmar.
The year of the God King Sigmar, 1999, and the Empire is at its lowest point. The Empire is truly fallen apart. There is no Emperor currently. Various elector counts are basically warring to become Emperor. And Osterburk is in ruins. Osterburk is the province that we find ourselves set in. And it very much, it's funny because it's what I had in my brain when we were playing Nick's Dungeon Crawl Classic on the Precipice of Corruption. The villages are emptying. Everyone is heading to the city, basically, of Mordheim to try and get away, because there's beasts in the underbrush. Everything's kind of dangerous because there's really nobody patrolling. The Imperial armies are all divided, and the Empire is basically at a tipping point of like all of the elector states are separate little fiefdoms, and some are rich and some are poor, and there's no help coming from like the actual Emperor, because there isn't one right now.
So Mordheim is basically the Golden City on the hill until midnight.
Yeah. And one morning in the year 1998, or the beginning of 1999, there is a comet seen in the sky, and it's a twin-tailed comet. And it's taken as an excellent sign that there will be a new harvest.
Omen. A new
day will dawn. Yeah, a new day will dawn. Everything will be great.
Why does that comet keep getting bigger?
As the new year, as the new year approaches in 1998 or 1999, the comet gets bigger and bigger and bigger in the sky. People are filling the streets of Mordheim, and eventually, as like basically midnight strikes at the turning of the year, the comet comes crashing down into the city and kills everyone. And when I say it kills everyone, I mean it turns their bones inside out. It's a full-on Simpsons, like, the town that dreaded sundown, the mist that turns you inside out. Your skeleton dances outside your body. And the city becomes mostly uninhabitable. There is like green fog and mist rising up into the crater in the middle of it. A few people survive. There's a convent on a giant hill or a giant rock that basically survives, the Order of the Sisters of Sigmar. And there's things that come crawling and leaking up out of the ground, basically, that are terrifying to behold. And this is the coming of what's called the Shadow Lord. The Shadow Lord is an entity at this point in the Book of Mordheim that we don't really know a lot about. It's just a thing in the pit. It's very the color out of space. There's a lot of like, it's funny how you can draw a lot of parallels to other media in this book, because this is a Games Workshop punk rock first stab at something. Yep. So there's a lot of like stir-fried pop culture in here.
This is set in the old world, but you can see where the parts that aren't from the old world came from.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's I think one of the joyous things about it is it's one of those times where they're still making stuff that has a bunch of kind of like wink nod, like elbow, hey, get what this is kind of stuff to it. We later on find out, I think in like, it's probably a 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle in 40k. The guy in the pit is Be'lakor, and that he's been cast out. He's a demon prince that aspired to godhood, has been cast out by the Chaos Gods, basically, and lands on Earth. And he eventually erupts back out and becomes the Be'lakor that you know in Warhammer 40k today. But the Shadow Lord is just this nameless entity. Cults spring up around it, the cult of the possessed, because if you go too near the pit, you come back looking funny. There's lots of thingness to this, the body horror of the possessed, and they become one of the factions. The other faction, of course, that's on the prowl because the comet itself has broken up and is scattered all across the city. And it's got chunks of weirdstone in it, which is glowing radioactive green rock. So, of course, the Skaven show up and they're like, wow, this is a complete gold rush. Let's go find this stuff. And because it's also valuable, well, everybody else starts selling it too. But the Skaven in particular, of course, are naturally attracted to weirdstone. Because of the amount of corpses, the undead show up, especially some of the Sylvanian electric, or I think vampire counts. Because I think this is actually before the Battle of Helfen. So Vlad is still in power there, and the electric count of Sylvania is secretly a vampire. Nobody really knows. So there's lots of emissaries of the vampire aristocracy that come showing up to try and like harness the power of the weirdstone, the magic, see what's in the pit, just investigate and stuff like that. And then the convent itself, the Sisters of Sigmar, they are trying to isolate and collect the weirdstone and put it in a vault to keep everyone safe from it. So they kind of sojourn out of their convent and come and like break stuff down and like bring it back so that it's not harming anyone and it's not able to hurt anybody. The human factions are primarily, there are 3 in the book, but they add additional ones later on. They add like Averland and Osterburk and stuff like that. Osterburk being very poor. But the 3 that are in the book, of course, are Marienburg, Reichland, and Mordheim, which is kind of they're kind of like the Blood Angels, Ultramarines, Space Wolves of the I think analogs of the old world. So it kind of fits that they picked those. So you have the Marienburgers who are rich, they get an extra 100 gold crowns when they form their war bands. The Reichlanders who are good shots, so they get +1/+go on their marksmen, and the Mordheimers who are tough and strong, so their champions and bosses start at strength 4. It's the only real difference.
And they get wolf heads.
I think wolf heads, and cloaks and stuff, and hammers. Yeah, they get cool hammers. I mean, technically everybody gets hammers, but you got some frames in the box to make them. They get extra hammers, and hammers are actually really good because they're cheap. So these are our protagonists. The final one is the Witch Hunters, and the Witch Hunters are actually at odds with the Sisters of Sigmar. That even though they're technically kind of both worshiping Sigmar, they're very the Sisters of Sigmar are very Joan of Arc to the Witch Hunters, where they're going to burn them down as being witches. And they're basically like a holy order of Templars that have come to like purge the city.
The depiction in generally the art, but more specifically the miniatures, is the Sisters of Sigmar are done like very classic, kind of heroic, again, Joan of Arc, D&D paladin, very legitimately uplifting and good. And the Witch Hunters are done in very much like a Solomon Kane or actual 16th century witch hunters, where it's like, yeah, we're going to tell you the good guys, but we're not the good guys.
A lot of tricorn hats and buckle shoes and yeah, pompous yelling dudes.
A lot of guys built like me with receding hairlines.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
they do not look particularly heroic.
Putting scarlet letters on people, telling people how to live.
Yeah. Guys with entire shirts made out of belts. It's just great.
It's got a belt shirt. The miniatures were done by a variety of people, but a lot of Perry miniatures in there. The Morrisons and some of the monsters and stuff like that. And they are very much that 6th edition mid-hammer, sort of like wonderfully to scale, not too heroic sort of style, which I really like. And this is basically where we kick off. Now, as the city's destroyed, there's an encampment sort of built outside of it. The gold rush is to go into the city, survive as long as you can, and bring stuff back. And here's where we get the roadside picnic of it all, where these warbands are effectively stalkers entering the ruins to come back with treasures and get paid. Sometimes you die, sometimes you live, sometimes the gas gets you, sometimes monster ghosts fight you, sometimes rats get you. Anything could get you in the zone. In this case,
there's always a second chance to be a zombie too.
Yeah, it is a fantasy roadside picnic, and the sort of like the guts of it are that storyline. So let's talk a bit about the mechanics and how that plays out in the game, because this is one of the things that I think in Bon Voyage is going to be important for game stuff. Is what is the reflection of this in the experience of playing the game? So first of all, and this is something Thomas has talked about a lot, is the gameplay itself, while it kind of informs 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy later on, is designed to be more narrative and cinematic than it's designed to be fair. So rules like parrying attacks, rules like stepping aside and intercepting charges are kind of key to Mordheim, where they aren't. It allows for you to position things and do things that are cinematic. Yep. Diving attacks, jumping off buildings, climbing, initiative checks where you pass and fail, hiding. These are mechanics that weren't typically in Warhammer games before. And while some of them existed in Necromunda, Mordheim is a primarily melee-focused game, as it's a fantasy game. So they became more important because you could sneak up past the guy with the bow and arrow and then stab him later on.
It feels like until the recent iterations of Quest games, this was the last stab GW really took at a miniature game kind of Venn diagramming with a role-playing game.
With an RPG element, yeah. So there are a lot of RPG elements based in the core rules. You have a budget for creating your warbands, typically 500 gold crowns. Each of the 6 original warbands, well, it's 6 goes to 8 because you have 3 versions of the human mercenaries.
Yeah.
They all have their own sort of bespoke like equipment and stuff. So not everybody has access to everything, but it was usually reflective of whatever came in the model kits. There was a line of heroic models, and there's 2 types of characters in the game. There's your heroes, who are the sort of named characters, and there's the NPCs, which are the henchmen. Henchmen die easy, and they can level up quickly, but a good henchman can accidentally become a hero. So if you don't have a full complement of heroes, they can join in. And then your heroes are kind of your named characters, and they're required to do things like look for Weirdstone, go out and explore, and do the various like post-game actions. And this is where the game became more interesting. In Necromunda, you kind of had, and actually, I would say in Necromunda in small ways, in Gorka Morka in much bigger ways, there was a strong post-game element to what would happen. I think Mechtown is probably a better representation of this than in Necromunda, because in classic Necromunda, 97 Necromunda, or 96 Necromunda, you didn't have as much interaction with the trading post. You didn't necessarily get in a fight in the trading post. There wasn't as many sort of like character-driven things that would happen.
It was the market.
And then in Gorka Morka, they started to where you might end up in a fighting pit, or you might go gambling, or you might go... and a lot of this was lifted from Warhammer Quest in 95, where you went to town, stuff happened.
Yep.
So you could feel like in Mordheim, they wanted a abridged version of that, but it needed to be something that was different every time, and also reflect the fact that you're going into the unknown and coming back every adventure. You're leaving the safety of the encampments around the city, going into the city, having an encounter, and then coming back. So there's lots of asymmetrical mission structures. There was lots of things like attacker-defender missions. Someone starts in the middle, defending Weirdstone. People outside were, encroaching on their sort of like area. Random hunts for treasure chests inside the town. They were not designed to be balanced and fair, right? No. There was a skirmish version where you just played like line up and fight, but for the most part, predominantly the missions were more around what's happening today with these people than they were about trying to recreate some kind of like war.
And this is that whole Venn diagram where you've got wargaming elements and role-playing elements, and they're overlapping, and where the overlap is the part of the design concept where you're like, we're willing to sacrifice game balance for better narrative play.
Yeah.
And it's not that one necessarily completely dominates the other, but it's when you think about it versus a most current generation war games where balance is in some way the holy grail.
Yep.
It's like, no, if you can tell a funny story afterwards, that's the holy grail.
Absolutely. And it's funny how that's even reflective in the gold piece cost of the equipment initially, where the value of the thing in Thomas's mind wasn't as important as how expensive it would be to make that thing. So a club is incredibly cheap, whereas a sword is more expensive. Clubs are actually better in the game than swords, offensively speaking, because they stun you more often.
Right.
So there's a interesting thing that Thomas does there, where light armor is the cost of 2.5 swords. So to get light armor is very often completely irrelevant. You're going to pay 25 gold crowns for it or 50 for heavy armor, but because it would cost more to make, he just makes it more expensive. It's a luxury item.
If you have 2 gamers facing off against each other and one of them is a min-maxer and one of them's a modeler, you can tell instantly as soon as you look at it. It has nothing to do with the quality of the paint jobs. Like, you can just tell when you look at the miniatures they put on the table.
Yep, absolutely. And that's funny how the game is trying to be an experience. And I think this is, again, part of what happened when Mordheim came out was you had people who weren't used to that interacting with it and being like, well, spears strike first and they're cheap. I'll just have 2 spears. There's just guys running around like with like ski poles, like just stab people. Yeah. So it's reflected in the narrative of like the creation of the warbands. It's reflected inside the actual like equipping of the models and in the gameplay experience itself. When you're going and putting models down the table, that often you're not fighting for the same thing, and it's all story driven. And then we get to the post game, and the post game had exploration roles, and of course the standard sort of table of like, do you live, do you die, what kind of experience do you earn? And that in and of itself is pretty standard in these types of games. It was already in Necromunda, it was already in Gorka Morka. The exploration role, though, was a new and unique experience to both. And that meant that there was always Cracker Jacks at the end of the game based upon how many of your heroes survived. Because the more people were looking out and looking around, the more might spot something interesting on the way in or on the way back. This was the stalker part of this game where you might find something. So what happened was when you ended your game, you rolled a number of exploration dice. The highest, added together, the total of it would reflect how many pieces of Weirdstone you found, because that's just your heroes are looking for Weirdstone. Do they spot some and dig it out of the rubble? If you rolled doubles, triples, quadruples, quintuples, or sextuples, you would find a special encounter too. So you almost always got a double, which would be like an overturned cart or a well. I often threw my young bloods into wells to try and look for weird stone, just to see what's down there. Usually they drowned. But
I did just tell you I was watching Hunting a Blind Man.
Yeah. A lot of people in wells.
Don't stand next to the well.
Yeah, don't stand next to the well. And the high end stuff was like you could find like a suit of Grommel armor. You could find some like nobleman's like cache of like weapons and fine art and stuff like that.
And again, to me, this is one of those like stuff like the Grommel armor and stuff like that. This is one of those things that goes back to the moving away from game balance being the holy grail, because a die roll could suddenly have one of your characters in a position where they were just substantially out of scale power-wise with the rest of the game.
Yeah. This guy's a space marine now. This guy's got Grommel armor shield. He's a space marine now. Sorry, everybody. Sorry. This guy's just a space marine walking among you. And so the experience of the game was you never quite knew what you were playing, what your guys were going to walk into encounter-wise. And then afterwards, you never really quite knew what they would find on the way home. And that is a unique design principle in Mordheim that makes the experience of the game memorable. It has tons of memorable moments and tons of things that are in there. And I think that's important to talk about from the point of view of the game design. Now, like we said, it was expanded. New warbands got added. It went through into the Fnatic era and got a couple extra things in Empire in Flames. Empire in Flames took the game out of Mordheim.
Yeah.
So when eventually Magnus the Pious basically bulldozes Mordheim into the ground, it's all gone, but the Empire is still like a mess. And so you have these warbands scatter into the countryside, and the game becomes, well, what if Mordheim, but just anywhere in the Empire? And so you can just have your game of Mordheim be a skirmish version of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And that was great. There was a carnival of chaos that would like ride around infecting different towns. The beastmen were living in the woods. All the other war bands also existed. You got some new characters like the Road Warden and stuff like that. It was a great.
Oh my God, that guy's
addition.
mustache was so good.
The Road Warden was a great.
I totally forgot about that guy's mustache.
Yeah. Oh, no, you're talking about the Don Quixote. You're talking about the Hedge Knight. The Hedge Knight had the
I
Don
thought that was the
Quixote
Road
mustache.
Warden. Which one?
No, the Road Warden was the one that was just pointing, and he had the giant hammer over his shoulder. He's a great miniature though.
Oh.
He was like foot and mounted, but he was just this dude who's like. He's a cop, basically.
No, screw that guy. Traveling Knight.
Yeah. The Freelance Knight is a great miniature because he's just Don Quixote. Like he's a fantastic model. Also,
great mustache, great hat.
There is a fighting fantasy reference in this book because Nicodemus is in this game.
Yes.
The dramatis personae, which actually became a term that was used by Workshop in all of their other games.
This was basically where that started, and it was funny because my understanding is the whole way this became a thing was the pre-digital sculpting.
Yeah.
The sculptor failed the assignment and basically turned in a 35 millimeter miniature for a 28 millimeter.
Yep, there's a giant wizard.
And it's like, okay, now we need a reason why this is a giant guy because this is the miniature that we're.
He's accidentally growing. He's hulked himself.
He's eating weird stone.
He's
eating
weird stone. Yes, he's huffing. He's right. He's just snorting weird stone and getting too big. But each of these dramatis personae had a story. They were kind of the last element of the game that was character driven. You had an assassin named Johann the Knife. You had Nicodemus, the wizard of the bridge. You had Anur, the Sword of Twilight, who was like the special sort of like super swordsman. He was very like Yojimbo. Like he had a very like.
I remember during that era, I don't remember seeing a single high elf army in the store that didn't have that miniature in the high elf.
I mean, it was a Jez. It's funny because every sculptor came out for Mordheim and did like at least one miniature, and Jez did Anur, the Sword of Twilight, and it's a fantastic miniature. He's like cloaking himself. I can't remember. I think there's one where there's a Skaven guy who's like a clockwork rat. I can't remember his name. No. It's not Ikka Claw, but it's something like that. It's like Veskit or something like that is like the special character.
Veskit sounds right. Yeah.
I think it's Veskit, but he's basically, he was a mechanical rat that had fighting claws, but also had pistols built into his fighting claws. So he could like do like a Tony Stark, like kaboom as well. Warlock pistols.
Iron Man is a rat, which is basically Iron Man.
And then you had some characters that came along later on through the game kind of growing, like Uli and Marquand, who were these two just human mercenaries that had their own comic book strip that was published through the different town criers and stuff like that. And so there it is. We've headed in, we've found our weird stone, we're on our way back, and unfortunately we rolled double ones, and we end up in the bottom of a well.
We always roll double ones.
And I'm in the bottom of a well. We fail our toughness checks, and we wake up, and just outside of town, we've been dragged back by some just cloaked figures that have way too many arms and legs. And we're presented with one of the vendors who has a huge stall of pilfered art from the destroyed manor house. And then on the other side, just various items that we could use to survive and maybe get rid of this strange growth that I now have from being dragged back by this guy.
Why do I have green lumps?
Yeah. So this is our moment to talk about art versus product in the Dark Exhibition.
Gallery to the left, gift shop to the right. Have your tickets ready for the Dark Exhibition.
So in the Dark Exhibition, we try and talk about where this falls on the scale of art to product. Now, as we're talking about a thing that is being made to sell. Obviously, intrinsically, we might think of it as a product, but also it was obviously a group function, group work by a bunch of people who were very passionate about it, which would also maybe land in art. Neither of these are value judgments. It's more about where do we think this lands on that spectrum, because that informs kind of how we think about it and how we talk about it. So it's useful to do. So this was a patron pick this week, so I'll start with this one. I honestly think Mordheim lands firmly on the side of art because there's no pretension to it, and it's writer out. This is we talked about this earlier, but it's one of the last times where an author in the Design Studio Games Workshop has an idea. It starts at the writing stage, and then all the other wheels in the machine kick in afterwards. So what happens today in product development, and it's called product development because it starts the product is, those processes from concept kick off concurrently. So at the same time the rules are being written, the packaging is being designed, the miniatures are being sculpted. It's not a linear process, it's a concurrent process very often. And that's how you get things having to conform to each other. You have to write rules for these miniatures because we're already designing these miniatures. You don't get to decide who's in this game.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because back to where you kind of started the discussion, as a member of the audience, as a potential customer, as a gamer coming into it, you got to remember this is completely backwards from not only current Games Workshop presentation, but Games Workshop presentation for the most part at the time. Because you saw rules and background way before you saw miniatures, months before saw miniatures.
Yeah, because the core gameplay was already written, and they said, try it out with your Warhammer miniatures. Give it a go. And we're going to have a full game coming out in October of 1999. And that was or November of 1999. And that was a very different way of doing things.
Yep.
And so because we have designer first out, basically, this is a game that's very much informed by one person's desire to make a game a certain way. There's no rules assignment person being like, oh, you should probably make very often you're not going to get to use your light armor. So it probably shouldn't be 25 crowns. It doesn't seem like it's worth 25 crowns. Nope. Thomas decided that value is based on how much it would cost to make. That's the design principle. That's what the gameplay is going to be like. And the rest of that stuff, whether it's an art choice, a design choice, or a product choice for like building the actual miniatures, is entirely informed by the whims of the artist involved. And does it fit the general vision? Yay, nay. Other than that, throw it all in there. One of my favorite things in Mordheim is the playing card. I once asked Alex Boyd at a Games Day, why was the playing card in there? And he dead ass looked me right down the barrel and said, just because we put stuff in games sometimes to mess with you. And I was like, that's the best answer I've ever had. Yep. That's the best answer you could have given me, right? It's just because. Why are all the fish in Mordheim? Because sometimes we just do a theme and that messes with people, and we like that. Like, we did this. There isn't. It's there so you make up your own reason. It's there so that you imagine why that might be. There's no. You can decide what that is for yourself, but the reason it's there is to make you ask that question, not for there to actually be an answer. So all the weird design choices across the art style very often has these like weird little like recurring themes or homages. There's like weird little tiny people carrying things. There's tarot very often sort of like shown in it. There's this theme of fish. The fish thing, my favorite thing is that the fish thing is nonsense because it should be nonsense. It's nonsensical. And everyone can have a theory about why it is, but the original reason, according to the artist, was just because it needs to be weird. This is our vision for this, and it needs to make you ask those questions and feel a certain way. And so we did it this way so that it feels a certain way. And so for that reason, I think it lands into art because it's being done to create a feeling during the game and in the gameplay experience. It's being done to create a feeling when you open and look through the books to get inspired. And it's being done to a way that you want to elicit that. That's an intentional thing. And that puts it on that side of the line for me because it's not just designed to sell. What about you?
So as I alluded to earlier, I'm going to spend a bit more time talking about product versus art than I usually do.
Cool.
I'm also going to get in my rocking chair and get a glass of Country Time lemonade.
Okay. And
I'm going to tell a story.
All right, tell a story.
So I was in the company at the time that this was coming out, that we were getting ready to release it, that we started selling it. And I'm going to start up with a confession that comes years later because it's something it's informed the way I've looked back on certain things.
Okay.
I remember having a meeting that you were at.
Yep.
Where the point I wanted to underscore to everybody at that meeting was there never were any good old days and that we were creating the good old days.
Right.
And several years later, a decade later maybe, a long time afterwards, one of the guys from that meeting corrected me and said, those were the good old days. So I was right and I was wrong at the same time, because apparently we were creating the good old days and those became the good old days.
Sure. Yep.
The lesson that I learned from that was that sometimes you don't realize, and this is stupidly obvious, but sometimes you don't realize that you're at a very special moment in time until it's behind you and you can assess it with context. So I mentioned before that I think Mordheim it's almost like a heavy black dividing line between an old way and a new way of doing things. Mordheim was, with the possible exception of 2nd edition Necromunda, was really the last game that very comfortably sacrificed game balance for fun, for entertainment, for silliness, however you want to put it. But I don't think anybody knew it was that game when they were writing it, because how would you know? How would you know you're doing something for the last time? No one ever knows when they're doing something for the last time. So back to where we started, I guess. In my mind, Mordheim is a product. It actually followed the pre-Necromunda strategy plan product cycle of Necromunda. So Necromunda originally was not Necromunda. Necromunda was a series of White Dwarf articles called Gang War. And they had Gang War miniatures, which ultimately did not end up being the Necromunda miniatures. They were available for sale. They came out.
There was the Helmar gang. There's all those dudes, the confrontation.
And a lot of them were the metal bodies with the plastic arms, as like was the style with the guard at the time. Arms, that kind of stuff. So in a lot of ways, and in not a cynical way, like this followed a previous, much earlier, like 6, 7, 8 years earlier version of Games Workshop's product development that had worked at the time, had spawned something that had become really huge and really successful. And they kind of went back to that formula. And it had a similar but not as successful kind of outcome. It built the same kind of fan base. It built that same kind of long-term loyalty. And it, you know, again, it is product, but I'm saying that in the same way that I said Thundar the Barbarian was product. Because in my mind, it's completely product, but the other side of the equation is it's not artistically compromised by being product.
I love that. I think that's a great way of looking at this dividing line between it really being product, and there still being some sort of attempt made at making each of these offerings unique, right? And I think that's what I sit with Mordheim, is that the driving the way that I see you perceiving it as product is, let's make a really cool experience and that'll be what sells it, versus let's make the greatest game and that'll be the experience that sells it.
It wasn't produced in a lab. It was a product produced by artists.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, the sun is slowly dawning as we make our way out of the gift shop. And this gift shop is, of course, selling all kinds of tinctures and potions.
Smells like fish in this gift
shop.
There's
a halfling cookbook. There's a halfling cookbook all about cooking the weird bipedal fish that are just wandering around the market. It's very Simpsons near the river in Mordheim. And of course, now we are clubbed in the back of the head by the witch hunters and taken off to their sort of their ramshackle prison where they keep the raving lunatics that stumble out of Mordheim. And we have to try and read the etchings on the walls left by the flagellants who have been stored there basically until it's time to go back into the city and go to war, and talk about themes in the Grim Asylum.
As night descends, we scratch our messages into the walls. Future warnings for inmates of the Grim Asylum.
All right, so Grim Asylum is where we talk about the sort of what makes this grimdark to us. What are the things that we pull out of this and say this is what lands it in the landscape of Grimdark Media. Now, Mordheim is evocatively grimdark, right? It's about a calamity. It's about the cynical gold rush that goes into a tragedy where tens of thousands of people died basically, and now we're gonna make some money off of it because the thing that killed them is all broken up and valuable. Also, by the way, something lives in this pit and it's mutating people and turning them into weird cultists.
It's fine.
It's fine. Everything's fine. But yet there's a kind of an insane merriness to it. Yeah. An idiot piper sort of like dancing around the sort of city while Rome burns, kind of a merriness to it. So my first take on all of this is going to be that there is a element of incomprehensibility to Mordheim. And that incomprehensibility is steeped in the art, right? The fish, the tarot cards, the weird iconography and symbolism. The thing that you don't know is in the pit, the Shadow Lord. What is the weird stone doing? Is it gaseous? Is it radioactive? Like
it's green.
It's green and it glows. Why do the rats want it? The fact that there's like talking walls and ghosts and spirits, the whole roadside picnic of it all. And it's only years later, because I didn't interact with Roadside Picnic until my mid-20s, right? So I didn't, and it was the film, it was Stalker the movie the first time I saw it. So it wasn't me understanding these references intrinsically, but those themes of like exploration into a damaged, destroyed, and entirely hostile place that you do not understand, and where the rules might change all the time, gives it the real feeling of like old school chaos. Old school Warhammer chaos is this like creeping taint that you cannot get rid of, that if you realize it's there, it's already too late and it's already in you. That incomprehensibility of like, you don't know when death is coming and you don't know what it might look like, and you don't know even why this is happening to you, except your greed is pulling you into the situation. That incomprehensibility and like no capacity anyone has to understand their situation is like the strongest theme for me. Is that Mordheim is, no one knows why it happened. No one knows what's in there. No one knows what this like stuff means, but they're all going anyway because someone's going to pay money for it, and that greed is going to drive it forward. What about you?
So I started with some of the same ideas you did, but I actually went with anarchy. And the reason is, for me, is so your analog that you keep coming back to with the I guess kind of the overarching feel of how the characters in the setting interact with the setting is Roadside Picnic. The overarching feel for me about how the characters interact with the setting and each other was Deadwood.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay.
It is this lawless hellscape where no one's in charge, really. Like, you can have whatever you can take, and effectively you can have as much of it until somebody else becomes stronger and can take yours from you. So anarchy was kind of the main thing I felt in the action of the setting. Is again that idea that I'm going to go in, I'm going to take what I can get. I'm literally and metaphorically rolling the dice on what fate is going to hand me at the end of it. But the idea that it's every day is do what you want day.
Yep, it is.
Until somebody makes you stop. And that somebody is not coming from, an elector count in the Empire. It's not coming from the mayor of the town. Like, that somebody is just a bigger, scarier, worse person.
Rule of the strong. Yeah. The rule of the strong. So yeah, I like that because there is a level of like anarchy in there. Because the whole world's in anarchy, and this is the place where they get to come together and no one can stop them, right? Because the Empire's basically in a state of ruin. So my next one was insanity for the same sort of reasons, is that everyone who interacts with this place eventually in some way becomes unhinged, right? And it's reflected in the rules. There's rules for madness. There's rules for like generating hatred and becoming scarred, and all that stuff is sort of like reflected in the damage table for that. And also lots of the characters themselves suffer from insanity, right? Like the cultists are all insane. They're all worshiping a thing in the pit they don't understand.
Sorry, I should have looked it up in the book. I always forget the term for them. What is the minions in the Witch Hunter Warband?
The minions, zealots.
The zealots.
Yeah. Zealots
with
and
like the hand puppets and the signs on their neck.
They're unhinged. Yeah. Everything's unhinged.
Mental.
Like even the fact that like the freelance knight is represented by Don Quixote, who is
Have historically, I mentioned how great his mustache is?
He's a fantastic, he's a luxurious mustache. But Don Quixote is a literary figure who is insane. His whole thing is he's tilting windmills, but he thinks they're giants. Like that idea of insanity leading you forward, and it's backed up by the art, it's backed up by the thematics of tons of the miniatures, that they've been driven mad by everything that's happened to them. And that even like the persistence of the Sisters of Sigmar against the destruction of the city comes off as insane.
Yeah.
They're not winning, but they don't know how to do anything else. So they do it anyway. Like that idea that there's a madness in all of the choices, and there isn't really a sane choice left because of the situation, comes across to me really powerfully. So what's your next one?
So my next one, and it's funny because I'm going to reference this as being a strong element here now, and then I'm going to back away from it when we get to our rankings.
Okay.
But I went with Decline because Mordheim, within its own box, fixes the thing that I have my whole life, like whether it was as pre-Games Workshop, during Games Workshop, post-Games Workshop, it fixes the thing I have disliked the most about Games Workshop games my entire time playing them.
Okay.
Which is that it is always 2 minutes to midnight. It's always 2 minutes to midnight, and midnight never comes.
Right.
And the fact that within the context of this game, the comet hits the city.
Yeah.
It destroys everything. Like the calamitous event that, the calamitous event is coming. It actually happens.
Yeah.
And then again, you've got these people living in this lawless environment, taking what they can from it. There is even your Sisters of Sigmar, which let's say they are objectively the good guys, good gals. They're not trying to fix anything. They're not trying to make anything better.
Yeah.
They're not even really trying to hold back the darkness, right? Like the city is ruined and it's getting worse and it will continue to get worse. The fact that, and again, because of the whole Y2K thing, the fact that the one time Games Workshop decided the clock should strike midnight was literally during a time in the real world where everyone was terrified of the actual clock striking midnight. Perfect.
That's fantastic.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, my last one is death. And that's because life is incredibly cheap in Mordheim. One of the easiest things to lose in the game and the most expensive thing to lose is your henchman. If you are a nameless guy in the back of the movie, if you're the dude that's like, you've had 3 minutes of screen time and we would know way too much about you, you're probably going to die. Like you can lose models.
Hey man, why don't you show me that picture of your family again?
Yeah. And there's a strong dividing line between heroes, protagonists, and supporting cast. And the supporting cast, if you're not careful with them, are incredibly disposable. The game reflects the fact that death is everywhere and it's not great. You can also die in the post game. There is pit fighting. There's just being captured and sacrificed. There's all kinds of bad things that can happen to everybody in this game. And the idea that the end's already come and life is completely valueless. These people are basically risking their lives for a little bit more money by going and like digging this weird stone out of the rubble of this like destroyed nuked city effectively. Death was like my primary sort of like, or my tertiary, like, yeah, I know life's cheap. This is grim. Nobody's going to survive this and nobody really has good intentions. So what's your last one?
So my last one is fear. And this might be the time I get to be more cynical than you are.
Okay.
Wow, so that's surprising.
Whoa.
So everything you're talking about with death, my perspective on it, playing the game and from the character's point of view, is that death and reward is a cost benefit analysis. Now, obviously, as in any kind of like skirmishy campaign game, it is.
Right.
But no game, I shouldn't say no game, very few games put that so front and center.
Yeah.
Like the fact that the treasure is the thing that will kill you.
Yep.
Like every single moment you have to decide. And as anybody who's played a campaign miniature game where your characters grow and you become attached to them and they get better, like there's always a point where it's like, I should go do that thing. This is my best guy. He's the best suited to going and doing that thing. Oh, do I want to risk him on doing that thing? Or should Ensign Redshirt over here go take care of that for me? Even though he's probably not going to succeed, but he might.
He might send him first. He can knock that guy down and I'll go step on his neck.
So that to me is, it's the fear that exists for the characters within the game itself, but also exists for you as somebody managing that roster, right?
Because death is everywhere.
Because death is everywhere. And the consequences of death to me, because it's a game, they're not as bad as the fear of what the consequences of death are, because, oh man, I can't afford to lose that guy.
Yeah, that guy's carrying all my stuff. That guy's got way too much light armor.
That guy's weapon skill 7. Yeah. I can't afford to have him fall into a hole.
Yeah, you definitely don't put armor on your henchmen, because that's like tripling their cost sometimes. All right, so there it is. We have exited the Dark Asylum, or the Grim Asylum. We've been kicked out by the witch hunters for being too sane. We didn't chew up our fingers. They're like, oh, you're not like useful crazy. You're not like, you don't have like a weird horse
fish
bit
in one hand, a little puppet on the
other.
other.
No moppet and fish. No bit in your mouth while you're swinging a flail. A homemade flail made out of garden tools.
Oh my God. For anybody who hasn't seen the miniatures for this game, by the way, just
go look.
Just go Google the
It's a whole series. Yeah. I mean, and they're not modern miniatures, right? These are all hand sculpted and they are weird as fuck. They're fantastically weird.
Carnival of Chaos and the Witch Hunters are by far my favorites.
Yeah, your favorites. I like actually my favorites, if just for weird, is the Frenzied Mob. Because they were from, basically there was rules in Empire in Flames for the townsfolk eventually just turning on you because they're like, get out of our town,
enough of
assholes!
this!
That's right, yeah, because you've done too much damage. It's like in Red Dead Redemption when your level gets too high and the Pinkertons come and try and kill you. But those monsters are great, or models are great. So we now have to, I guess, head back towards the city, and we find a massive pile of green glowing rocks, slightly shaped like skulls. And we have to stack them in an order that is pleasing to us and that allows us to put this into a rankings for where we think this sits in the land, like the landscape of Grimdark Media as we build our new Throne of Skulls.
As the light fades and the end draws near, where does this sit upon the Throne of Skulls?
All right, so Throne of Skulls, we've got 20 skulls each. We're creeping up. This is our 15th skull.
15.
That's a lot of skulls. We've been doing this for a minute now. And these skulls basically, they are both how much we think they are grimdark and how much we like them. Yes to both those questions. They're personalized.
So it's funny. Somebody asked that in the comments.
Yeah.
And this is what, there's this and one other entry on this list for me that highlight the fact that it is, sometimes it's one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because it's something I like a lot.
But it's not. But this is the dividing line for me, and that'll lead us to my 15th, which is I actually disqualified it. I don't put it on my list. It's the World War Z. World War Z ended 2, hopefully for me, and I think it's also still the 15th on your list.
It's still 15th on my list for sure. Yeah.
All right. So what's your 14th?
Last of Us Part 2.
Mine is Rangers of Shadowdeep. Into the 13th.
So the 13th for me, and I'm going to explain this a little bit, is Mordheim. So Mordheim. There's a huge division in Mordheim for me, and it's based on two things. The first thing is that the art and the aesthetic, I kind of mentioned earlier that when we built our table in West Ed, we got away from the visual presentation that was laid out in the game and did our own thing. At the time, and still to this day, but cameras have gotten better and things like that. One of the central directives for the studio was to make sure everything photographed really well. So a lot of the representations of the stuff, of the actual miniatures and everything in Mordheim, it's a lot brighter than I want it to be. It's a lot cheerier than I want it to be. It's a lot cleaner than I want it to be.
Yeah.
The art is not like that. The sculpts and the miniatures are not like that. But all the color shots, they're just too bright and uplifting. And the other one for me, and this is the thing I mentioned in the product versus art thing that I was going to circle back to, is my favorite thing about Mordheim is that Midnight finally happened. And then it kind of felt like coming out the back end, we undid it because, it can't actually be Midnight. We've got another 100 years worth of product to sell.
Yeah, 200 years have to go by.
And the thing for me is when you transition from Warhammer 9th to Age of Sigmar, that effectively becomes your actual Midnight, your actual apocalypse. So knowing that this Midnight wasn't the real Midnight.
This is a prelude to Midnight.
I love this game. I love these miniatures. I've always liked it. But it's not as grimdark as I want it to be.
Fair enough. All right. Not grimdark ending. Well, then my number 13 is going to be Event Horizon. So your number 12?
It's funny that literally, I think you and your Event Horizon is my Mordheim and vice versa.
It is. I think so, yeah.
Because that's exactly what's going on here. So my next one up is Astartes.
All right. My next one up is going to be the Book of Eli. This is my number 11.
Yeah, my 11.
Sorry, my 12.
Yeah, I'm confused now because I wrote my
I'm at 12. Down. You're at, because we're now offset from what the list I made. So my number 12 is Book of Eli. Your number...
My number 11, which again is the other one that fits in the Mordheim category for me, where I love it, but it's not as grimdark as I think I want it to be, is House of Hell.
Yeah. So then my number 11 is going to be Thundar the Barbarian.
So for 10, I've got Roadside Picnic.
Then I've got House of Hell.
9 for me is Thundar the Barbarian.
I've got Hard Boiled at number 8.
Oh my God, I can't even read my notes now. What did I just say?
Book of Eli.
Book of Eli is next. I'm just trying to remember what number it is now.
Number 8.
Number 8 is Book of Eli.
Yeah. My number 8 is The Black Company.
My number 7 is Rangers of Shadowdeep.
My number 7 is Astartes.
My 6 is The Black Company.
My 6 is Mordheim.
5 for me is Hard Boiled.
5 for me is going to be The Precipice of Corruption.
4 is Event Horizon for me.
4 is Roadside Picnic.
3 is Precipice of Corruption for me.
3 for me is going to be Call of Cthulhu.
Number 2 for me is The Thing.
And my number 2 for me is The Last of Us Part 2. This is our biggest swing between these two games.
And number 1 for me is Call of Cthulhu.
And number 1 for me is The Thing. Yeah, we've got a couple that are real far apart. The Last of Us Part 2 is the furthest apart.
Last of Us Part 2.
Event Horizon is a bit apart, but not as far apart as The Last of Us Part 2.
No.
And then some things we're like synced up on. Like we're synced up on World War Z. We were very close on Thundar, very close on House of Hell. Our like childhood traumas versions are all very close together. So 5 to go. I think I messed up some of the numbering in there, but just check the screen when you guys see it. I think because we're going back and forth. We wrote down our ones.
We wrote them down, and then I realized I missed one. Yeah. I changed one, and I rearranged one, and
I know.
Basically, long story short, I can't count from 1 to
whatever
15.
you said out loud is going to be what our rankings are for this week, and I'm hoping we get the numbers right. So we'll figure it out. They're getting hard to track now because there's so many. There's 20 of them. We have to put new ones in. But we have another patron pick actually because the patron pick was game for last month, and this month it's going to be Film Media, and we restart the loop at Film Media. So we go right back into another patron pick, and our patron pick for Film Media with a runaway like result, which I was very surprised by because we gave them a lot of options this time around, is Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
So we're watching, and this is a good
Witness Me.
And I think this is a good one because Furious is obviously on the horizon soon. So we'll get Fury Road out of the way, and that way we can do like a we'll go watch Furious, and we'll cover that one as well. And I'm excited for that one, obviously, because we both love George Miller. I'm probably just going to compare it all to Happy Feet.
Yeah, I was going to say when we rank them in the Grimdark scale, do we use Happy Feet as the dividing line?
I'm gonna pick Happy Feet
more or less.
I'm gonna pick Happy Feet at some point to show how Happy Feet is a Grimdark movie made by George Miller. Because the guy that directed Mad Max Fury Road also directed Happy Feet. Never forget that. Also, the bad guy in Happy Feet is Agent Elrond. is Hugo Weaving.
Well, Hugo Weaving has to be. There's a 10-year period where Hugo Weaving has to be in every movie,
and it has to be the bad guy.
You're not allowed to make a movie unless Hugo Weaving is in it.
So I'm super stoked for that one. We'll see you for that one next week. And thanks for doing this.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Thanks for being patrons. Until next time, I'm Ash. Have a good night.